There's this line of thought that says that if a game doesn't provide a variety of mechanics and modes, then it's not worth your time, especially when there are so many games that do offer broad experiences. This is probably why sandbox games are usually so popular. Games like Grand Theft Auto provide shooting mechanics, driving various vehicles, stealth sections, minigames. They offer so much in terms of just things to do. I often find that I disagree with this line of thought. I find that a lot of games sacrifice depth in the search for broad appeal, and it is possible to make a game that does one thing, but does it very, very well. Let's talk about Punch-Out for the Wii. Released back in 2009 for the Nintendo Wii, Punch-Out was the third home console release in Nintendo's series of boxing games. You play as Little Mac, who hopes to climb the ranks of the World Video Boxing Association and claim the title of World Champion with the help of his chocolate-loving coach, Doc Lewis. And really, that's all there is. It's a boxing game, but it isn't a realistic boxing sim with countless meters and complex controls, no. It is arcadey as fuck, but it is brilliant. At its most basic, Punch-Out gives you two actions: attack and defend. In terms of attack, you have hooks and jabs of the left and right variety, as well as a special star punch, which we'll talk about a little bit later. For defense, you have left and right side steps, a duck, and a block which eats Little Mac's energy, not to be confused with his stamina. Speaking of, you have a stamina bar, which dictates how many hits you can take before being knocked down, and a heart counter that dictates your energy. Mac's stamina meter decreases whenever he eats an attack, but the heart counter drops with each attack that Mac blocks, each attack his opponent blocks, and it drops severely when Mac takes an attack head on. Once that hits zero, Mac won't be able to attack until he successfully dodges an incoming punch. And that's pretty much all there is. These are the mechanics that are going to take you from the bottom of the contender list to the championship belt. There's no upgrades, no skill trees, you just have to take on increasingly difficult fights with the skills you start with, and man, Punch-Out is super satisfying to beat because of it. You know that it's you getting better at the game, not Little Mac. Mac is as good as he's ever going to get, and it's the player that needs to step up their game. So the main attraction here is Punch-Out's career mode. It's basically a succession of gradually more challenging bouts against the game's colourful and diverse cast of opponents, starting in the minor circuit. Here we find returning competitors from past games, Glass Joe, Von Kaiser, and King Hippo, as well as one of the game's only brand new fighters, Disco Kid. All in all, the minor circuit is a good introduction to the basics. Dodge attacks in the right direction, counterattack when the opponent is recovering. First up is Glass Joe, the so-called Glass Jaw of France, and he's basically a practice dummy. He's slow to mount any offense and his blocking game is pretty poor. Dude needs to keep his hands up more often. Seriously, even when he does throw a punch, he telegraphs it like crazy. The wind-up for enemy attacks does get smaller as you get higher up in the ranks, but it's always there and it's always fairly clear. And I think it's worth mentioning just how vital the game's animation is when it comes to making Punch-Out such a satisfying experience. Obviously, having clear telegraph animations is paramount in a game that's so focused on split-second reactions, and it's something that Punch-Out manages to keep delivering, all the way into its latest stages. But how do you make it more challenging without removing these wind-ups entirely? Well, the game makes those wind-ups faster, it makes the direction of the attack unclear until the player learns the moves, and eventually, Mac's opponents will fake a wind-up, only to launch their attack while you're busy recovering from an early flinch. But it's more than just the telegraphs that are important. If these attacks didn't feel powerful, eating a hit wouldn't feel like such a big deal, but man, these dudes hit hard. Having a big wind-up and a massive payoff where the animation lingers just after you're sent reeling makes every boxer feel like they're hitting you with the force of a truck. There aren't a lot of frames between wind-up and delivery, so the attack still feels fast, but by favouring that moment just after impact, these animations really sell the power of Mac's opponents. It isn't just power that these animations are selling though. With only short and very charming storyboards to introduce you to the cast of characters before you fight them, the game's animations are there to sell you on the personality of these characters as well. While those personalities are often broad and stereotypical, you can't say that you don't know who these characters are after you fight them. Glass Joe is nervous, kind of goofy and awkward. Von Kaiser has a militant air to him which cracks to reveal some sort of trauma beneath the surface, and Disco Kid? He's flashy and flamboyant and, well, the kid loves disco. Like I said, all of the minor circuit fighters are a great introduction to Punch-Out's mechanics, but King Hippo is the first real challenge, and also my favourite character in the game. He's massive, his punches demolish Mac's stamina, and at first his defenses seem impenetrable. Sure, you can get a quick punch in on his face after he misses a shot, but he goes back on the defensive pretty quickly. But despite his girth, the dude's got a weak belly. Or at least hitting this clearly advertised weak spot causes him to have a continuous wardrobe malfunction, during which Mac can take advantage. He's the first fight in the game that I can think of that features a strategy beyond hit them a bunch once they've missed you. So you keep at it in this war of attrition and you'll soon find yourself as the minor circuit champion. After a quick training montage complete with some of the most motivating music you'll find in any video game, it's time to tackle the major circuit, and this is where the fights start to get nasty. You've got Piston Hondo with his quick tails and even quicker jabs, Bear Hugger with his deceptively slow haymakers, Great Tiger with his misleading magical attacks, and Don Flamenco who constantly goads you into attacking before unleashing a quick counter-attack. It occurs to me now that I never actually explained how you win and lose fights in this game. If you know anything about boxing, it's pretty obvious. You can knock your opponent out when they can't answer a 10 count after being knocked down. You can win by TKO by knocking them down 3 times in the same round, or you can win by decision when you're barely holding on by the skin of your teeth and have to run the timer down. Now, it is entirely possible to lose by these methods as well. Getting knocked down puts you into a button mashing minigame where you've got to mash the buttons to stand up before the 10 count. And losing by TKO is even easier for Little Mac because he just has to be knocked down 3 times in total, not just 3 times in the same round. And you can probably lose by decision. It's never happened to me, but if you're not careful, surely it must be possible. Generally speaking, I think winning by TKO is the most fun, simply because you'll often get a charming animation of your opponent going down in a fittingly over-the-top manner. King Hippos will always be my favourite, but to be honest, I think they're all pretty good for a laugh. But again, I think this game has some astounding animation. The only exception would be Little Mac himself, but his strikes are intentionally very utilitarian, while still sticking on the animation's payoff for that powerful feeling. The last thing you want is for Mac to have flashy animations that draw your eye away from where it should be, your opponent. The only time Mac gets the same treatment as an opponent is when he launches a Star Punch. These super strong strikes are earned by striking opponents during certain taunts, and later on are given to you when you perfectly counterpunch certain attacks. They not only do significant damage, and in some cases one-hit KO opponents, they also feel super good to land because, like your opponents, you get a massive windup and a huge payoff. The only difference is you get to see the deer caught in headlights face as you wind up, and that is just the best! After some tricky tussles with the major circuit competitors, it's time for another training montage and a trip to the World Circuit. If you weren't already finding fights tough, then the World Circuit will push you to your limits, especially the first time around. We have the Fighting Irishman, Aaron Ryan, who headbutts the shit out of you if you're not paying attention, Soda Popinski, the Russian strongman who brings life-giving soda into the ring with him, Bald Bull whose anger could put the Hulk to shame, and Super Macho Man whose only crime is loving himself too much. 2 of these guys are just straight up cheating by bringing headbutts and unsanctioned substances into the ring, and the other 2 are just assholes. The standards of the WVBA are slipping, that's for sure. In earlier circuits, the worst you had to deal with was an Indian gentleman bringing his illusion magic into the ring, and as far as I can tell, although it may be against the spirit of the sport, I don't think it's actually against the rules of boxing. Whatever, surely it can't get any more illegal than this, right? Now, the actual fights of the World Circuit themselves are pretty intense. It's here you'll find the most initially misleading telegraph animations, the strongest attacks, and the most crucial gimmicks to wrap your head around. Punch Soda's drink bottle out of his hand, or else he'll regain a huge amount of stamina. Punch Aaron Ryan mid-attack to stun him properly. Gut punch Bald Bull mid-bull rush to knock him down instantly. Earlier circuits were pretty open with how you approached them, but these bouts feel very intentional. You can eke out a victory by playing safe, but if you want a proper KO or TKO victory, you're gonna have to learn when to strike. Thankfully, Doc Lewis does have some pretty handy hints in between rounds. Sometimes they're overt, sometimes they're kinda cryptic, and sometimes he just rambles about chocolate, but generally speaking, I think Doc Lewis is nice to have around. He has a few funny lines, he helps out a bit, but he's just such a supportive, wholesome presence in the game. And he really loves his chocolate. But taking Doc's advice proves useful, and after smashing against these guys over and over, Little Mac has finally done it. He's reached the top. He's the #1 contender, which can only mean one thing. It's time for the title fight. And Mr. Sandman is an absolute beast. He's taken out everyone you've faced along the way, seemingly without breaking a sweat. The ground shakes when this dude walks into the arena. Doc Lewis is clearly uneasy, but Mac? Little Mac is a fighter, and he is ready. The title fight against Mr. Sandman is no joke. Where every competitor leading to this point had a goofy theme and these exaggerated movements, Sandman is 100% business, and the only time he does anything other than punch Mac, he taunts you instead, trying to make you flinch. The attacks come fast and often, and Sandman, in stark contrast to our first opponent, Glass Joe, rarely takes his hands from his head, even after he's stunned. It's a pure test of spotting Sandman's tells and reacting quickly enough to avoid taking a fist to the face without falling for his deceptively slow overheads or his flinch-inducing taunt, but eventually, after what is bound to be numerous attempts, Mac is triumphant. The 5'7", 17-year-old Brooklyn Brawler is now the champion. And that's where it ends. The credits roll as Mac celebrates reaching the pinnacle of the WVBA and... I'm just fucking with you. What kind of champion would Mac be if he didn't defend his shiny new belt? So it's back to the beginning. 13 challenges want a taste of Mac's gold, and you have to defend it against all of them, starting with Glass Joe and working your way through the circuits until you're face to face with Mr. Sandman once more. Although on paper this sounds like padding because who wants to face the same fighters more than once, you quickly learn that it's anything but. At a glance, the title defense bouts feature a makeover for your opponents as well as some more aggressive tactics, but they also feature extended movesets, some of which roll out over the course of an entire 3-round fight. And more often than not, they feature a gimmick that changes the way you need to approach a fight entirely. Take Glass Joe for instance. After taking too many blows to the head, his doctor has recommended he wear headgear instead of just quitting the sport altogether, so all head blows are auto-blocked. King Hippo goes so far as to strap a manhole cover to his soft belly, meaning you have to figure out how to remove that before you do anything else. Great Tiger has upped the intensity of his magic, letting him teleport and send mirage clones at you with surprising speed. Aaron Ryan brings a no-joke boxing glove on a rope into the ring to take swipes at you. So the competitors that were cheating before are now doubling down on that approach, and some of the guys that weren't cheating before certainly are now. The WVBA should be ashamed of itself. Beyond the charming, albeit illegal gimmicks, these fights are pretty tough. Most, if not all of your opponents start trying to fake you out, and the tells for these are either tiny or told to you outright but in a completely different language. Thank you, Von Kaiser. The wind-ups for their standard attacks are generally way faster too, with the most extreme case of these being the Mr. Sandman rematch, where his tell is literally a split-second wink on his part. Now, I can beat the contender fights pretty confidently up until Mr. Sandman, but these defense bouts can be mind-meltingly frustrating. Just when you think you have these boxes figured out, they bring all these new gimmicks, techniques, and a new aggression to the table, and if you've never played through the game before, you're bound to be caught off guard, especially during title defense. It's here that Punch-Out's secrets really come into play. Now, like I said, the core gameplay never really gets much more complex than it is at the start, but there are a few things that the game doesn't tell you right off the bat. Taunting during your opponent's 10 count, for instance, can help you regain stamina, as can letting Doc munch on a chocolate bar in between rounds. Hell, there are a bunch of secrets hiding in each individual fight if you know where to look, most of which award you with star punches or even one-hit KOs. You can even fight through the pain if you take 3 knockdowns and start mashing the buttons like an absolute madman, and Little Mac looks so cool powering through the 3rd knockdown. And nothing feels cooler than snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Really though, unless you've memorized the patterns and know his one-hit KO conditions, you will be tasting defeat at the hands of Mr. Sandman again and again and again. You do get to revel in Mac's championship glory for a brief moment during the fight's intro, where the roles have been reversed as Sandman watches Little Mac enter the ring with absolute disbelief, but after that, cool boy, you are in for a world of hurt. The dude was already an intense opponent, but the rematch makes Mac's original title fight look like a cakewalk. Lightning fast punches that hit like freight trains, tells that are either super quick or so small that they're tough to notice the first time around, an aggressive final stand that can ruin an otherwise perfect bout. Mr. Sandman is maybe one of the toughest and most rewarding fights I've found in any video game, but he's not impossible. Like I said, if you can memorize his patterns or have the knowledge and skill to take him out with a one-hit KO, Mr. Sandman is beatable, and once he's done, well, that's kind of it. You unlock Mac's Last Stand as a way to close off the career mode, in which you face a series of random opponents, finally retiring once you accrue 3 losses, which is incredibly easy to do against almost any of the title defense bouts. But there is one final opponent that Mac can challenge before we've seen everything the single player has to offer. He's been there watching, waiting, since Mac hit the world circuit during his title defense run, but he doesn't show himself until Mac's Last Stand. He's the leader of the bunch, you know him well, it's the banana slammer himself, Donkey Kong. In what might be one of the coolest video game guest appearances, Donkey Kong can challenge you at random, and he's not only super powerful, most of his strikes are super misleading. Most of that comes from DK being far larger than any of Mac's other opponents, so his animations can be kind of difficult to read, but you know what? That's fine. It isn't the best fight, but it's a damn cool Easter egg, and a surprise like that is an awesome way to cap off a great experience like Punch-Out. Punch-Out for the Wii is not the most graphically intense game around. It doesn't have this deep story with a winding narrative and multiple characters with different motivations. It doesn't have diverse mechanics, and even for a sports game, it's simple as heck. You can punch, you can dodge and block, and that's it. But the first fight against Glass Joe is so different to the fight against Von Kaiser, and the fight against Von Kaiser is so different to the fight against King Hippo, and King Hippo is so different to Don Flamenco, and so on and so forth. Beyond their style and personality, which is expertly communicated through these fantastic animations that I refuse to shut up about, each character has their own intensity. They have their own gimmick, they have their own strengths and weaknesses. You know that punching Bald Bull in the head is different to punching Bald Bull in the gut. You know that King Hippo protects his face unless you give him a reason to drop his hands. You know Don Flamenco will take forever to throw a punch at you unless you take his bait first. And it all feels so satisfying. Again, the animations make Max strikes feel powerful and impactful without giving them the same flashy, distracting flair that all his opponents have. And I haven't talked about it until now, but the game's camera work is fantastic too. The way that the camera swings from side to side as you dodge gives it a real sense of momentum, and the subtle zoom in when you go to wail on a dude's stunned face just makes every blow feel that much more important. If Punch-Out was being remade today, I would ask for one simple change. Get rid of motion controls. It feels so weird to go from holding the Wiimote horizontal to play and then having to switch to pointer mode to navigate the menus. Especially since you could easily navigate the menus using the D-pad and the buttons. Otherwise, I think Punch-Out for the Wii is exactly what it needs to be. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect video game, everything has flaws, but, you know, this comes pretty close, I think. It could have left its versus mode out entirely, and I still would have felt like the game was worthwhile. So with that said, Punch-Out for the Wii gets the TopHat Gamer seal of approval. If you have a Wii, or a Wii U, I highly recommend tracking down a copy of this game or downloading it from the Wii U eShop because it is so worth playing. And Nintendo, if you're out there, and I don't know why you would be, but if you are, please make a sequel. Please, please, please make a sequel to Punch-Out for the Switch. It's not like you don't have some punch-oriented characters floating around there, and I would hate for those ARMS character designs to go to waste. But that's it from me. Let me know what you think of Punch-Out for the Wii in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Peace.